Okay, let's get started. Um, Welcome to the Media Mentorship through Peer Coaching virtual workshop. This virtual workshop is brought to you by the Maryland State Library Agency and the Indiana State Library in partnership with New America. We're so excited to be part of this partnership that joins together two states in this important work. And we are so incredibly lucky to have wonderful, knowledgeable speakers today. We're going to spend a few minutes now introducing everyone. So I'll go first. My name is Beth Yates. I'm the children's consultant at the Indiana State Library. Carrie, do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Sanders, the Youth Services Coordinator with the Maryland State Library Agency. I'm very happy to be here.
Great. How about Lisa? You ready to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody, and good morning. I'm Lisa Guernsey. I'm at New America, and I'm trying out my new fancy background just for just for kicks today, so you don't see my messy house. But glad to be with you all. I'm joining you from Alexandria, Virginia, just outside our offices in Washington, D.C.
Great. Connie, you want to go next?
Sure. You all can see you can't see my mess, but you can see my messy house without the mess behind me. But my name is Connie Stripmatter. I'm the Youth and Family Engagement Manager for Baltimore County Public Library, which is the county just outside of Baltimore City in Maryland.
Great. Dorothy, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Dorothy Stoltz, and as many of you in Maryland know, I retired from Carroll County Public Library earlier this year, and it's nice to see some familiar names. And hello, Daryl Robertson. But I retired as Director for Community Engagement, and I'm currently serving on the advisory board for the Erickson Institute's IMLS project on professional development on media literacy for librarians. And I'm a consultant trainer and author of some books from ALA. So welcome, everybody. So glad to be here.
And we're so happy to have you. So thank you. And then finally, let's hear from Amy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Kuster. I am joining you today from the Skokie Public Library just north of Chicago, although I'm excited for an Indiana group training because I'm from Indiana originally. Yeah. So I'm Purdue, not Notre Dame, if you want to talk about it later. And I'm also currently the president of the Association for Library Service to Children. So I'm here with that perspective as well. I'm so glad to be here today. Thanks.
Yeah. So hopefully you can all see how thrilled we are to have these wonderful speakers today. We're also going to have several special guests this afternoon. I'm just going to say their names right now, and then we will hear more about them and their involvement with media literacy this afternoon. But we've got Nigel White from the Hartford Public Library. We've got Kimberly Conti from the New York Public Library in Brooklyn. We've got Teresa Quiner from the Kuskokwim Consortium Library in Alaska, and Krista Rapace from the Early Childhood Education Services, at the Maryland Public Television Station. And we will hear from them this afternoon, like I said. I do want to comment on something I saw in the chat was that someone was having audio problems. Just a heads up, if you are having audio problems, we are recording this and we will share that recording out later. So if you aren't able to resolve your audio issues, and it does seem to be just you and it's not a widespread issue with one of the presenters, then you can hopefully watch that recording back later and it will be clear for you. Okay. So before we dig in, I do want to mention also one more time that library staff in Maryland and Indiana are eligible to earn a total of 4 learning credits for today's workshop. You'll get 2 for the morning and 2 in the afternoon. Carrie is popping the link one more time, or I can. Here, I'll do it one more time into the chat. So do make sure, as we've said, to go and fill that form out, because that's how we'll know to send you resources and your certificate. And you'll receive those in the coming days. It might take a little bit of time. They might not come immediately. All right, I think we're ready to go, and I'm gonna turn things over now to Amy Kuster to talk about the importance of why we're here today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beth.
Mhm.
So I just want to set a little bit of the context for why we're here, because I know we've all got a lot of things going on, and it means something to take this much time out of your day to participate in some learning and interaction like this. So why we're here, I'm guessing for everyone in this room today, we're here because we care deeply about kids and families in our communities. And we know that over the last couple of years in particular, the challenges in front of the kids and families who we serve have been more extreme than perhaps usual for a lot of reasons. And one of the things we're seeing too is a lot more day-to-day use and awareness and engagement with media of all sorts, but in particular, a lot of digital media, thinking about how many schools, for instance, were giving kids devices before COVID, and now how many have devices for school. So we're seeing a lot of families who are overwhelmed. They have questions. They're not quite sure where to get information about these things that are just part of their day-to-day lives now that maybe weren't a couple of years ago. So for us today here, everything we're learning, all of the conversations we're going to have, it's about supporting these young people and families that you're seeing every day in your libraries or in your work. So families really need support, and by leaning on each other and learning from one another today, we can hopefully do an even better job of being the support that those families need. So I hope feeling that sense of like connection to your community can help you feel grounded in what we're trying to accomplish today.
Okay, thank you, Amy. So we're going to do just a really quick icebreaker activity. It's going to be, we have 4 questions. I'm going to ask you to answer them or give your best guess, at least, in the chat. So we'll go ahead and do the first question, Carrie. So from 2017 to 2022, time spent on screens for 0 to 8-year-olds tripled. Is that true or false? See lots of trues. Ooh, everybody's saying true. All right. Well, the answer is actually false. Who would have thought? It's actually nearly the same. And this information comes from Common Sense Media's 0 to 8 reports from the year 2020. Data in 2020 showed that children 0 to 8 spent on average 2 hours and 24 minutes on screen media. In 2017, it was 2 hours and 19 minutes. And in 2011, it was 2 hours and 16 minutes. So it's only gone up literally a couple of minutes each year on average. So, hey, that's good, right? Okay, how about the second question? For the first time, what is currently dominating children's screen time? Give your best guesses in, education, school. Those are good guesses. Social media, games, TikTok, YouTube. Okay. Those are all great guesses, and many of you are very close. For the first time since we began the census, online video viewing. So YouTube, those of you who said YouTube, that's definitely one of the places where they're probably getting it. Dominates kids' screen time. Our youngest kids are spending 39 minutes a day watching online videos on platforms like YouTube and TikTok. And it's up from only 19 minutes in 2017. So 20-minute increase. Let's do our question number 3. What percentage of children ages 0 to 2 and 5 to 8 have their own tablet or smartphone? Put your guesses in the chat. We got some all over the place. I see a lot that seem to range from like 33 to 50-ish. Some people are guessing more, some less, 25. Okay, so the answer is nearly half of 2 to 4-year-olds and more than 2/3 of 5 to 8-year-olds have their own tablet or smartphone. So a lot of you were pretty close, although it's actually even more. I think we had quite a lot of under guessing. So surprisingly more than that. Okay, and then our last question. Children in lower income households are spending how many hours more with screens than children from higher income households? How many hours more? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 0. Okay, twice as much, Dawn says. 4 times. So it seems to range. I think most of the guesses were kind of 1 to 2. The answer is nearly 2 more hours with screens than children from higher income households. And the difference is also pronounced among Black and Hispanic Latinx families compared to white families. So pretty interesting. All right. Did any of our speakers have anything they wanted to add about any of those facts? Okay, well then we will go to our next slide. And I believe we're going to hear from Dorothy next.
Thank you, Beth. And I would like to give a shout out to Beth and Carrie for putting together this amazing day. So thank you both so much. What I'd like to do is give a brief history of media mentorship in libraries, and it started back in 2010 with the invention or the when the iPad came on the market. And for the first time, young children no longer needed to develop the dexterity and ability to type or use a computer mouse. Babies and toddlers were able to use a computer just by touching a screen. So there was a librarian in California, Ken Campbell, and that's spelled C-E-N, Ken Campbell. She started to use the iPad in her story times. She reached out to other librarians to compare notes, and she started a blog called Little eLit, and Amy Kuster became its editor. I was honored to be part of a team with Ken and Amy and Claudia Haynes to produce the white paper for ELSC, the Association for Library Service to Children, and Media Mentorship in Libraries Serving Youth. Now that was 2015. The next year, Ken and Claudia published the book Becoming a Media Mentor along with ELSC. And ELSC continues to promote media mentoring. There's this great resource, Look to Libraries Media Mentoring, that came out in 2020. Now, at the bottom of this screen is sort of what was happening parallel outside the library world. In 2012 was the publication of Screen Time, and 2014 Tap, Click, Read. And both of those resources were written by Lisa Guernsey of New America. And we're so honored to have Lisa with us today. And Lisa has been an inspiration to libraries since the early days of Little eLit. She's worked with ALA and ELSC really each step of the way. And finding ways to support the work of libraries to find new approaches to help children, students, families succeed in this digital world. So Lisa has been involved in several library-focused projects and has been instrumental in examining and developing high-quality learning opportunities, especially for underserved and historically disadvantaged populations. And you'll hear about those projects. And Amy Kuster was involved with one of them, and we're so delighted to have Amy with us today. And also Connie Strittmatter was involved in one of those. And again, you know, it's just an honor to have this wonderful team together. Now, also parallel to this is the work of the Erickson Institute, and they focus on technology and early learning. And there's two publication examples at the bottom of the screen. One's called Technology and Digital Media in the Early Years, which came out in 2014. And the other is Family Engagement in the Digital Age in 2016. There are chapters in those books about libraries by librarians, so you might want to check those out. Now, as I mentioned in my little intro was that the Erickson Institute is in the midst of its national IMLS funded project on media literacy professional development for libraries. It's a 3-year project, and it'll finish up next year, so we'll be hearing the results of that. It's been very competitive. They have 3 cohorts and only 25 slots per cohort, and we've had over 200 people apply for each cohort. So, anyways, it's a hot topic for sure. Now, later this morning, we're going to feature this Media Literacy for Young Children. It's a NACCE resource by Faith Rogo. And I've been in conversation on the topic of media mentorship over many years, including designing that 2018 project that Connie was so involved with. And I've never been disappointed with the thoughtful approach to the topic of media mentorship, whether working on projects or at national conferences, state conferences. And I'm also more inspired each time I attend a conference like this. And we hope you will enjoy today and help us to continue to make some history. Next slide, please. And whether we call it media mentorship or peer learning or excellent customer service, libraries should focus on learning as a priority, no matter the format. Today is an opportunity, and no matter what kind of staffing, budgets, or resources our particular library might have in our situation, it's important to reflect on what we're already doing. And I'm sure you're already doing a lot of things you haven't thought about if this is newer to you. And to also think about the potential of libraries helping families make their own wise decision about media literacy. That's sort of the crux of this. Librarians do not traditionally call ourselves mentors, but the word mentor focuses our attention on how we can be helpful to people of all ages. And media mentorship demonstrates a high level of intersection among traditional media, such as the printed book, new media, such as the iPad, virtual reality, robotics, and a librarian's potential for demonstrating the joy of learning. And what a gift it can be for us to be able to model for our patrons, share with our community members how to love learning, the joy of learning, and lifelong learning. So what we'd like to do right now is share a 1-minute video clip. And this was produced by Little Elit back in the day, and we hope you'll enjoy it here. Okay, and just to say that Ken Campbell was in there a few times, including the one standing in the library book stacks as a sort of a superpower media mentor for libraries. And you may have noticed some of you in Maryland, some Maryland librarians in that as well. So Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dorothy. That was very fun. So I'm just sitting here thinking about all the change we've seen in the last few years. I do want to do a little plug since Amy called Roots to Indiana. I will let you all know that I was born and raised in Indiana as well. I'm an IU girl, so Amy and I can have the Purdue IU conversation a little later. But I was a school librarian for 10 years in Indiana before assuming this position in Maryland. And I'm thinking about just that continual back and forth between what we're doing with kids in the public library world and in schools in terms of old media or traditional media and the new, and how we can help them find the informational needs when they're trying to find resources that will support them, and how it's obviously just moved from books into all kinds of other new rich resources, and then we just want to make sure that they have this exposure and awareness to be able to tap into all of those. I watch so many times with the classroom teachers, and if you're from Maryland, you've heard me say this before, I just feel like this is such a niche for us. Classroom teachers are focusing on using the technology to really impart the content and to focus on what they're trying to teach and the standards. And families are not always sure how to manipulate and work with the technology because it's being used more and more. And so who's going to provide that? And I really feel like the role of the school librarian, the public librarian can come in and really fill that spot to support our children in whatever resource they're trying to use to meet those informational needs and their enjoyment and their enrichment. So there's just such a mix right now, I think, of the formal education, the informal, and how we can all of us be there to meet the information needs of our youth and support families as they're trying to support their children. And it's all about equity too. It's just what we can bring from the public library and exposure to these tools and resources so that all the kids are able to have access to them and they're comfortable in using them. We just can play such a key role. As you can see, we've got all these that look familiar. We've got Tumble Books, BookFlix, International Children's Digital Library, which is a wonderful resource. Hoopla, these are all ways that we can help our families and children access all the new media and the different resources that we can bring from our libraries. And this is just a picture from a few years ago, actually, of how technology is being incorporated into schools. In this case, there's a couple laptops there, there's some textbooks there, and we can imagine and know in the last 2 years how this has just evolved into so many children having their own device, the one-on-one programs through the pandemic, and just the proliferation of use of new media, and how we can be there on the out of school time to still continue to support our children as they're just seamless between whatever environment they're in school, formal to informal, at home and in the library, just to make sure that they have the ability to not only be consumers of our new media, but to be collaborators and contributors and be able to really be robust in their use of our media and our technology. So that's what we're going to work on today, and hopefully help hone those skills for the children and to support the families. I'm going to turn it over to Connie.
Hi, everybody. So we're going to do a little bit of a thought activity now. I want you to think about your first memory that you have watching the news. Think back to the first time you remember experiencing something on the news. And I want you to think about it from a few different perspectives. I want you to think, what was the content of that news story? What happened in that news story? I want you to think about how old you were. Where were you? What was happening around you when you saw this story? And who were you with? Did you talk to anybody about it? Were you alone? did an adult talk to you about it, or did you have to process it yourself? So I would like you to share that either in the chat, or if you'd like to share it out loud, you certainly can. You can unmute yourself and share that story. We're going to take a little bit of time to let everybody put it in the chat, and then we're going to kind of debrief and talk about why we're doing this.
I see a hand up from Don, if Don wants to come off mute and share.
Sure. I thought of two things right away. I'm 64 years old. I grew up I was in grade school in the 60s. And there was a program that I still remember to this day. I couldn't tell you exactly what year it ran, but it would have been somewhere right in the mid 60s, because I think the first heart transplant was in the late 60s. There was a program called The 21st Century on CBS, and it was narrated by Walter Cronkite. And they actually were showing open heart surgery, which as a little kid, in the 60s, that just completely blew my mind. And so that's the first thing. The second thing, just as an aside, I'm a musician. And again, in the 60s, when I was growing up, a lot of TV stations for their news theme song used a piece of music called American Salute. If you play in an orchestra, you probably know that piece of music. It's variation and themes on When Johnny Comes Marching Home. And so when I got a little older and got into junior high and we played that piece, I noted right away that that was a piece of music that I had been hearing for years to start off TV news programs in the 60s. Thanks.
Thanks, Don. Those were great stories. I'm just gonna kind of read through real quick some of the comments that we have here in the chat. One is the O.J. Simpson trial. It was all over the news, and it looks like Sasha lived in LA at the time, so that's particularly relevant to where you lived. And it looks like Sasha's parents did explain what was happening. I see here 9/11 was somebody's answer, was Taylor's answer, not knowing how to process the destruction. Another person, Allie, it looks like, who says they were 5 when 9/11 happened, and parents were being very quiet watching the TV. Katie says the JFK funeral, when they were a toddler, their mom was crying and the mom explained what happened. Let's see. Oh, wow. This one's very tragic. Jackie at 10, a girl Jackie's age had been a part of a murder-suicide. Their mother was with them and comforted when they couldn't sleep. Let's see. So the Vietnam War on a 12-inch black and white set. It is amazing. I have to tell my kids, remind them all the time how my television was about the size of my computer when I was their age, and they just can't process that. Oh, and this one was interesting. You don't recall discussing it. The space shuttle Challenger disaster in elementary school. So I apologize for not reading out all of them, but I hope you get a chance to scroll through. Wow, we have so many of these. Let's see. Oh, wow, I do want to read this one. Your first memory, Emmy's first memory, was Yo-Yo Ma playing at the 1-year anniversary memorial of 9/11. Emmy remembers their brother making them laugh, and their mom told them to be quieter because this was a serious event, but they didn't understand why at the time, which makes sense since you didn't remember perhaps experiencing the 9/11 event quite as much. It was the memorial that you remembered. So, all right, so why are we talking about all this, right? What I want for you all to experience by talking about these memories is not because we all have shared trauma through the news, even if that's true, but to understand that media has always been around, right? Our ages in this group span quite a bit, as you can see from the memories. We have some who talk about the JFK Memorial and some whose first memory of the news was as recent as 9/11. So we can see that media has always been around, and media has always been traumatizing us, right? We have always had opportunities to see something, even on a screen very specifically, that we might not understand, that we might need more context for and more explanation of. And it's always, it's not, and we're not always around the adult, right? Some of us explained that perhaps our parents comforted us during that time. Maybe we were around a teacher in a classroom during the Challenger explosion, but our context was not always that we were around parents or adults or people who really even understood how to explain what was happening, right? So when we're talking about media and children today, sometimes we get caught up, maybe not you specifically, but we collectively get caught up in this idea that this is a newfangled thing, right? That children are experiencing something so different from what we've all experienced, that they're going to be traumatized by what they see. And there's no question that there are scary things out there on TV, right? There are scary news stories and all of this. But what I wanted you all to understand here is that we all have this shared experience, right? We all have this shared experience of seeing and experiencing the news, the media on a screen, and figuring out how to understand it as a young person. So our job as librarians, as media mentors, is to be that guide, not only for the children, but for the adults who are going to be around those children when they experience something, whether it's traumatic or not. My first memory wasn't so traumatic. It was just the Clinton-Bush election, right? I remember seeing the coverage, and I asked my parents each who they were voting for. So not everybody's first memory has to be traumatic. But that's our role, is to be that guide, that mentor. And we're actually going to move on to talk with Lisa about this very thing. And you'll hear her mention words that I used quite a bit in this experiment here, in this little talk. And it's something that Lisa created and has been a huge help as we dive into being media mentors. So Lisa.
Great. Thank you, Connie. Yeah, that activity, it just does bring back so much, right? Because it situates us personally and how we remember thinking and being as children, and who was around us. So I want to connect that activity to this framework called the 3 C's. And this is a framework for thinking about media and how it affects children and families and learning. And it's a framework that came out of research I did many years back. I am a journalist by training, and I was working on, I was an education and technology and science reporter. I was at the New York Times and the Chronicle of Higher Ed and a couple of other places. And I was working on that first book that was noted earlier, Screen Time. And I was trying to understand what the science actually told us about how children are affected by what they're seeing, like within the 4 corners of a screen. We have a lot of science on how children learn from books and how important book reading is with kids. But I wanted to better understand what we know about what learning emerges from a screen. And if it does, because obviously there are lots of debates out there about whether kids are learning anything from a screen. We know that they are, it's just what are they learning, right, is the question. So what the science pointed us towards, and what I summed up in this framework, is that the content on the screen matters. That's the first C. The context, who is around the child, and how is that information being imparted to the child through their own contexts. That matters a lot. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. And then third, the child, the individual child is incredibly important to this conversation. And it's so individualized. And so, of course, every kid is coming with their own kind of history of how they've understood the world so far. And then what they're seeing on screen is only something that they can understand based on their prior knowledge and their prior experiences. So as we're talking about so this breaking news activity that Connie just took us through, I think so much came out of our comments and our reflections in that, right? I mean, recognizing, of course, the content that was in some ways the most powerful to us was sometimes the most shocking content. It was something that really hit us emotionally. And so I think as we understand what content children are seeing today, we recognize what kind of suspenseful or sensational or kind of shocking content can mean to kids. And that also those who are trying to figure out how to help build content that's learning based, they also need to recognize that they're trying to bring storytelling and emotion into that so that kids can learn. The second piece of what we were just talking about was the context, like who was with you when you heard those stories about, or when you heard the news of 9/11, or in my case, it was the space shuttle Challenger exploding in the air. And I was with a friend and her mother at the time, and we were just absolutely just beyond mortified and upset. But at least I had people around me to help me understand that. Was able to go home, be with my parents. There were those who I felt I'm in kinship with and a relationship with, who helped me understand what was happening at that time. And then the third piece, the child. What is the age of the child? What is the developmental stage of the child? What is that kind of the own, like I said, prior knowledge that a child might be bringing to a situation? And some children have had all sorts of really hard experiences already in their home lives or with their families that then affect the way they take in media. And it's only until we tune into each individual child and we help parents tune into their own children that we can be aware of that and kind of cognizant of that and use that knowledge to help find media for children that are going to lead them towards learning instead of towards situations in which they're shut down or they feel like they can't take it all. So that's my quick, maybe not so quick, but I wanted to make sure that everyone kind of understood what was behind the 3 C's. And this is a framework that can be used in everything that you're doing in your library work. And so now, speaking of that library work, I'm going to turn it over now to Amy. She'll talk about this in context of what it really means to be someone who's working with families with these issues.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Lisa. I was actually visiting with some of my friends like back from middle school who all have under 5-year-olds now, and was talking with them about the 3 C's, because there is so much out there that parents need help kind of wading through, right? So they're lucky they have a friend as a librarian. So I want to talk a little bit about what are 3 different ways that librarians can support families in figuring out media and what's best for their families. So starting with media mechanics. So mechanics we're referring to with media is just basically, how does this work? It's important for families to know about the mechanics of the device. And if you think about kids entering school, they're taking a test on a tablet, perhaps, and they've never encountered that sort of technology before, so they're not quite sure like how touch and tap works. We already teach media mechanics when we're thinking about things like story time, when you're holding up a book and pointing out the cover and the pages and how you go from the front to the back and read from top to bottom, left to right, like that's all mechanics. So just purely understanding the hows of what our media is set up as, for older kids, thinking about in a nonfiction text that there's going to be probably an index in the back where they can look up information and sometimes like glossaries with definitions. So those are all examples of media mechanics. And you're going to see throughout today that we're going to try and tie in quote unquote traditional media. So when we think about, the books and stories that we share with folks, because as we've emphasized throughout all of this, these are concepts that we've been doing for generations. This is nothing new. We're just thinking about how it applies to a current context. So there's also media management. And when we're talking about management, it's really coming down to a question of, should I use this? Like, is this a good thing to use, good way to spend time, good thing to read, and for how long when it comes to a lot of digital media. So parents, perhaps you've experienced this, will most often come in asking questions about media management. They're not quite sure, like, oftentimes I hear people saying like, what should I do? How much is allowed? And the American Academy of Pediatrics discusses media management, and oftentimes Common Sense Media focuses on media management as well. So what's really important for us as library workers is to remember that we cannot dictate media management for parents and caregivers. What we can do is point them to places where they can do some of their own research and figure out what's going to be best for their family, for their child, for their context. Just like we don't tell parents how they should approach potty training, we take them to the section of the collection that has resources on that. We might have some recommendations there, but we don't dictate like, here are the steps that you should take. It's a family by family decision. And with traditional media, if you want that analogy, think about any time a parent has come up and asked you, like, is my child old enough to read, say, The Hunger Games? And really that's a question for the parent based on what their values are, what their where their child is developmentally, what their like sensibility is. And so we can provide information, but we don't say, here's what you should do, here's what you shouldn't. And then the last piece is media literacy. And that's, how do I learn from this? So what are the benefits that I'm getting from using this type of media? And this is ultimately what we want families to get to, a sense of like media literacy. So you need to learn how to use something and when it's appropriate to do so, but what you really want to learn is, how do you take something away from it? And oftentimes media literacy is best demonstrated by example. So using media in story times, talking to kids about what they've learned, showing families really great and engaging apps or websites that they can use together, providing that educational context for them to explore. So I want to dig into these just a little bit more deeply, because these can often be newer concepts to have pointed out for us in libraries, even though we're engaging in this sort of work every day when we're assisting families. So for media management, 2 resources that you can think about and explore. Common Sense Media, they provide some age recommendations and some explanations of how they came to those conclusions for different types of media. They, in my opinion, they've really increased their breadth of what they're looking at in recent years to try and provide nuanced context so that you can help answer questions without making decisions for families. And then the American Academy of Pediatrics as well has recommendations on the health of a child in relation to media use and screen time. When we're looking at media mechanics, again, that's, how do I work this? And I mentioned it's important for families to know the mechanics of the devices or the tools that they have. And you can see in the picture here that demonstrating how a book works. Think about the sorts of questions that you get from families in your community about any type of media. And as you register those questions, think about, okay, how can I proactively like demonstrate how to do these things? So it's not just about, say, having an iPad available in the kids' room of the library, but perhaps it's about in an arts and craft time, periodically adding in a like coloring or drawing app as well for an additional piece to help people see what are the mechanics of how to engage with these different types of materials. And then another piece of the mechanics, let's see, there should be one more picture. There we go. So giving not only the opportunity to like demonstrate for families, but also so that families can play around with things together. You know, you don't just hand a kid a book and they intuitively understand how it works. And it would be unreasonable for us to think that we could do the same thing with digital media. I know there can often be like funny stories people will share and say like, oh, my kid had a magazine and they kept like tapping the pages to get the pictures to move because they're so used to tablets. But we need to learn how to use anything. And so that sort of practice in the context with an adult caregiver who can provide like guidance and support is one of the things that we can really think about how we make accessible in our libraries. And then the last piece is media literacy. And so there's going to be a text-heavy definition up here from the National Association for Media Literacy Education. And this is what their definition of media literacy is. And you can see there are some bolded words here because these are the important concepts to be thinking about. Like when you're engaging with media literacy, you're engaging with how you access, analyze, evaluate, and create using these tools. So to learn new things, to make new things, to understand something better. There's also components of inquiry and self-expression, which namely says are necessary for citizens of a democracy. So thinking about how we're using and providing opportunities for kids and families to really tap into those inquiry and self-expression components so that there's opportunity to be a little bit more interactive. So before we take, oh, there's one more slide. I keep forgetting how many pictures there are. Just emphasizing again with media literacy, it's not just about how you consume or what, how you interact with the media, but what you're doing with that. So thinking about a more like play-based, physical play-based thing you can see on the left-hand side of this picture of kids building with Kiva planks. And it's not just about building, right? It's the things that they're learning as they're exploring through building, that hands-on piece. So like they're learning about cause and effect and like how tall you can build something before it collapses. And the ways that you learn from the activities you do, that's what's really important in media literacy that we'll talk about a little bit more later. So very briefly now, before we take a short break, I just want to note, because this could feel slightly overwhelming, all of this information to kind of set the foundation so far this morning. We're not in this alone. As libraries, there are a lot of ways that we can and really should look to our community partners, both for what they're already doing. You know, the American Academy of Pediatrics makes those recommendations based on developmental levels for kids. Talk to local health providers in your communities. Find out what questions they're asking or what they're being asked. Look to schools, look to government groups, nonprofits who are engaging with families in these ways, and talk about what you're seeing, what they're seeing, and potentially how you can work together. Because a lot of this is happening in communities, but we don't necessarily interact with all of our community partners who are doing it, and we can be really great teammates in this work together. All right, I think now we are going to take a short break. Carrie, did you want to give any notes on that?
Yeah.
Carrie or Beth?
Thanks so much, Amy. And we just really, today we're just trying to kind of give everything to you in either it's fun to have the acronyms like we just did the 3 M's and Lisa shared the 3 C's, but it helps to kind of compartmentalize a little bit, you know, what all is a part of media mentorship. There's a lot of pieces to it. So just thanks so much to both of you for kind of breaking down kind of the 3 C's we look at as kind of that more customer oriented. You know, we do readers advisory all the time. So this is just another way to think about the context, the content, and the child as we advise and work with the child and families. And then Amy just touched on what's a little bit more internal, you know, the things for us to think about library staff and our use of media with the mechanics, the management, and then imparting the media literacy for ourselves and for our families. So thank you so much. And I think we are going to take a little break. We didn't know timing wise how we would be, but we are in good shape. So we're going to let you all just take a few minutes, go get another cup of coffee or stretch your legs, and we will come back at 11 o'clock. So I am going to actually stop sharing just to have it look different and let you all turn off your cameras, go take a walk, get some whatever you need, and we'll see you back here at 11 to keep going. Beth.
And
something-
I was also going to say, I threw in the chat one more time the link so you can go, if you have not yet during the break, go and make sure you check yourself in for this morning so we can be sure to have you down and send you resources and your continuing education certificates.
I know I had one Maryland staffer say she had story time till 10:45 and she would be joining then. So want to make sure everybody gets signed in, and we will see you back here at 11. Thanks so much, everyone.
Sure. And also we will be sending out the links and the resources that have been talked about today. I've tried to put them in the chat.
Carrie, I think you're muted.
I am muted. Now I'm not muted. Welcome back. It is 11 and we're going to keep going here. We've got another full hour before we break for lunch. So welcome back. And I'm going to turn it over here to Lisa when she's able, and we're going to move into our next piece.
Great. Yes, thank you so much, Carrie. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're all, there's so much information, right? There's a lot to kind of understand and process. And we want to just keep centering the kids and families in this conversation, and especially those who do not have all the resources at their fingertips, do not always have the mentors around them in other situations that might be useful to them. So what I wanted to do was talk to you a little bit about some of the new data that's coming out on the digital divide, and what you'll hear me talk about as underconnectedness in a moment here. So this first slide here is showing you what I think a lot of us know already, which is that mobile access for children and families really has become universal. I'm going to move around for just one moment here because my dog is moaning and needs to go out as I'm talking, of course, sorry. And so we know that most families now, of course, do have some kind of access to a smartphone, and through that then would also have access to digital materials. However, and if you go to the next slide here for me, Carrie, thank you. What we're finding, in fact, is that they may not have access to good media and technology that gives them an opportunity to learn from quality media or to learn digital literacy skills, and to really gain this mindset for being more literate about media just generally, how it's created, how they themselves are consuming it, how others are consuming it. And a lot of this is because many families still do not have good access to online resources. They do not necessarily have high-speed internet access at home, or they're trying to do it all through a tiny screen that they're sharing across many different family members. So one of the things that we point out here in this slide is that what we're seeing is that it may not be that it's a black and white issue anymore about, or a binary issue anymore in terms of the digital divide. You may have families that, of course, are going to check a box on a survey that says they have some kind of access to the internet because they have it on their phones. But what they may not have is constant and high quality and high speed internet access. So what we found in this research here that you're seeing on the screen, this is from a study that was done by Vicki Katz and Victoria Rideout, and that we published at New America last year in 2021. And we looked at, and we surveyed, Vicki did, and then we published it and edited it, surveyed thousands of families across the United States, families that were in the lower to mid income bracket. So these were families that had a family income of under the median, which is $75,000 per year. And through that survey work, we found these statistics and many more. One is that 14% of 3 to 13-year-olds in these lower income families do not have broadband internet at home. We also see that 12% of the children in these families do not have a computer at home. And that more than a third of these families, those that were using their data plans or their phones, were coming up against data limits in their plans. So this, we're not talking about, outliers here. This really is a very large chunk of families today that are still really struggling to get the same kind of online access that many of us, I think, take for granted and that assume is available to them. So if we go to the next slide, Carrie. One of the other studies that I think really points to the importance of libraries in helping with this problem and really helping to connect families is a study that we did last year that was funded by the Sloan Foundation. And in this one, we sent out a survey nationally to not just families with children, but people across all sorts of different age ranges across the United States to understand what was happening in the middle of the pandemic for them. What kind of access did they have, and where did libraries fit for them in getting access to digital materials and digital resources? We found through that study that 39% of those respondents lost their access to the internet. 39% of those who lost their access to the internet because libraries had just had to close their doors entirely were those who spoke a language other than English at home. So we were learning through this survey and others that those who were the most affected often by the pandemic and all the closures that had to happen were those who were really relying on libraries to be able to help them connect with the world, connect to resources that help them, whether it's applying for jobs or learning about what's happening in their community or helping their children with homework. We also found that those who were losing their main source of internet access because of those closures were also the users who said in surveys that they were using digital materials for school or work. They were not just using the digital materials to watch TikTok videos. They really needed that internet access for what they were doing. Okay, so if you go to the next slide there. So what I think this really points to for us is that we need to be recognizing just the incredible role you all can play as librarians in your community. We have to ask ourselves, what would happen for these families if librarians aren't able to take on the role of helping parents to get to digital materials? What will happen if libraries cannot put a priority on ensuring that in this digital world that we live in, there are more opportunities for people to be getting online and have the guidance to get to what they need? If we, meaning those in the library world, and I really do, I love being part of that world, so I'll put myself in it as well. If we don't do this, who will? So other than schools, and I do think schools are really trying hard in this, but many of them are really, really stretched right now to a breaking point in many cases. What is the alternative? Is the alternative big business and technology companies? Is that what might happen if librarians kind of don't take up the mantle? And if that's the case, what happens to kind of neutrality or being able to provide resources without having a vested interest in what those resources are that families are seeing? So we just wanted to kind of really drive home the point how important your work is, how incredible it is for equity and equal access for families. And I see that already some people have posted in the chat that this really is an issue for them. I'm seeing some of the messages about in rural Indiana that the availability of high-speed internet is so scarce. If you please jump in the chat and add other experiences that you may have had or examples that you've seen of how your library and the resource that you offer through your library are in fact really helping to bridge some of this interconnectedness that we're seeing out there. So let's see, I think from there, Carrie, we may go to the next slide, and I think I turn it over. Is it to you, Connie?
It is, absolutely. Hello again, everybody. So you've heard a little bit today about different types of media. You've heard different types of media referenced. I think all of us are here today, not because we're unsure of how to guide people around books, right? That's a comfortable area for us, but really more because we are unsure of how to handle all of this new media, these new forms of media that are around us and around our kids and our families. So we're going to talk a little bit about the differences or similarities between what we might consider traditional media versus, and you can see right, new media. So we're actually going to do a bit of an activity, a breakout room actually, I think. Let's see. So we're going to do a breakout room where you are each going to choose your room based on when you graduated from high school. And in your rooms, you're going to talk about what media was like during your childhood. What were the kind of hallmark pieces of technology that were used during your childhood? And I want you to talk a little bit about how you viewed media. What did you think of it? And what did adults think of it? How did they talk to you about it? And I don't mean necessarily like we talked about before, how did they talk to you about the scary news story, but just media in general. What were the attitudes around media and technology that was used to consume that media? What were the attitudes during that time when you were a child? So I think, Carrie, do you have the power to get the breakout room started?
Yes, I think I do. They're going to be a little on the larger side. We have 3 groups, so you're all just going to go in and have a fun time in a larger discussion group. But we've broken these down into kind of 3 big chunks. We've got and we've done this, as Connie mentioned, kind of centered around the technology that was kind of the icon of the time or indicative of that time. So we have 1994 and earlier. So if that's when you were, graduating from high school, that's where you'll go. That's where we're kind of thinking about VHS or even earlier than VHS. As we talked, we were laughing earlier, it could be like 16 millimeter, films or film strips. Remember Westonwood film strips and on the bag. So that's one group. 1995 to 2009. So 2009, that kind of decade there where DVDs were the thing, and replacing VHS. And then earlier than that, or I guess later than that, would be the 2010 era, or since 2010, and that was iPads. So yeah, I know this is like reality check for all of us. So we're just having fun with this. So we've got our 3 groups, and we'll probably be in there for just about 6 minutes, and you can just kind of ponder, what it was like, what you were using, how it informed your research, like what you were doing in high school for school, and then also just entertainment. And we'll come back and see what we can all share. So hopefully this will work, crossing my fingers. You should be able to choose your room between one of those 3. And if you have any troubles, you should be able to pop out to the main room, find one of us, we'll help you. So here we go. I'm going to try to get you all launched, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Have a wonderful discussion.
All right, everybody. So I popped into one of the rooms. It was a very lively conversation. I hope everybody enjoyed their talks in their graduation year based rooms. Now, this was not an activity just to out your age. We already did that anyway. We know the first news story that you remember. So this was really just an activity for first for you all to kind of bond over what was media like when you were a kid. How, again, those questions, how was it discussed around you? What were the attitudes around media? And what were those kind of hallmark types of media that you used as a young person? So I'd love to hear some sharing from those in each of the groups. And maybe we go ahead and start with the one that was 1994 and before. Can anybody give like a 30-second summary of what you all talked about?
Well, this is Don. Mostly we just talked about how, I don't know how the various forms of media that we were using then seem so dated today, but there's still similarities. There's always been a tension between how much, even back then, how much screen time you allow. It was just screen time was TV back then. And so in some respects, it really hasn't changed at all. And we still all know families who are really diligent about watching how much screen time their kids get.
Thank you, Don. That's a really, really good point, and we'll definitely be using that as we continue our conversation. Does anybody from the 95 to 2009 group, can you give like about a 30-second summary of what y'all talked about?
Hi, this is Sasha. Most of us, we talked about when we first started getting computers and dial-up, because we were that group where, you know, it vastly varied as to what age we were when we got a desktop computer or had dial-up internet. And then we also talked about how we're shocked we all didn't die from child predators because of internet chat rooms was like the biggest thing. And none of us, I mean, the concept of internet safety and chat room safety just was like not even on anybody's radar when we were kids in AOL chat rooms.
It was truly the Wild West during that time. There's no question. And then anybody in the 2010 and beyond group want to share a 30-second summary? Don't be shy.
We just kind of talked about the different kind of access. I had talked about, I graduated from school where I had 37 kids in my class. We were very late to the game of one-on-one technology, and just kind of how overall, like, I mean, it's been very fast. My little brother is a junior at my old high school. He's 17 years old, and they just got iPads for the first time from Chromebooks and stuff. How some communities are still behind because of how rural they are and just the limited access based off of where you live.
That's a really important point for us to remember. And some of those true or false or trivia questions earlier on highlighted the fact that, you know, we often focus on how rapid the change is in technology and how rapid it has been in our lifetimes. But which can make it easy to forget that not everyone experiences I'll say the benefit of that rapid change. And, you know, benefits, it's kind of a loaded word in this case, as we're talking about, right? So what I really want to point out here is what Dawn brought up, which is that, you know, we just talked about how much has changed, but there is an element that has stayed the same, right? For all of us through all of our you know, lifetimes in this training here, there's an element that stayed the same, which is that media management piece, right? When Amy talked about media management being how long do you spend using this media? I always like to think back, I don't know, this is a very dated reference. I don't know if you all are familiar with the Beatles movie, Hard Day's Night, but there's a scene where I believe it's Paul's grandfather, not his real grandfather, but he's scolding Ringo for reading and saying, you should be outside playing, you shouldn't be reading, that's, you know, you're just wasting your time and getting ideas into your head. So, you know, these ideas of how long you spend in using media have been around, right? So if we move forward a little bit on the slide here, I think we have, yes, we have this chart. So many of us mentioned that actually none of these really came up in your conversations, probably because they're just so ingrained in who we are that we don't think about these as media, or as we don't think about these as technology, right? But we have things like magazines, DVDs. Our libraries are used to having things like kits, books on CD, and books, right? These are all technically types of technology. These are all ways that we convey media through a type of technology. And what we have here with these types of technology is familiarity, right? We understand these collections. We understand this content and the way that the content is being conveyed. And what you need in order to use these types of media in a library world is good people skills, right? We all go through those reference, trainings where we know how to guide a person to get to this type of media. And we know the criteria for what makes something quality with this type of media. So when we move forward and we look at new media, we have things like apps. We have things like, I would even say in some ways, internet's not new anymore, but back in as we heard from the 95 to 2009 era, when it was new, nobody was familiar. Youth were just using it, with no regard for safety, right? Adults didn't know how to guide them. And that's what we're talking about here, is that as media mentors, it's our duty to start to understand a little bit more about these new media, these things like apps, so that we can guide families through how to use this form of media in the same way that we would a magazine or a book, because the skills that you need to do that are all the same, right? You just need to be familiar with the collection. You need to be familiar with the content. You need to know the criteria and trusted sources for high quality. And you need to have good people skills, right? So just like you need some good people skills to get somebody to the right book, you need that to get somebody to the right app. So we're in the same boat when we're working with the new media as a media mentor. You can move on. Yep.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Connie. And we'd like to take a few minutes to highlight this resource that came out this year through NAEYC, the National Association for the Education of the Young Child, called Media Literacy for Young Children, Teaching Beyond the Screen Time Debates by Dr. Faith Rogo. And Faith Rogo is a leader in media literacy education. She has been a consultant to PBS and was the founding president of NAMLE, the National Association for Media Literacy Education. And like Lisa, Faith Rogo has written extensively on the subject of media literacy over the years, and this is her most recent work. So I'd like to ask Lisa to get us started on reviewing this resource.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dorothy. So I know that when I first heard about and started to better understand media literacy, I thought about it in the context of older children. I thought about how much I might have been taught about what commercials meant and how to look at how women might be portrayed in commercials. And I learned that when I was maybe in late middle school or in high school. But what we're learning and what Faith's work really helps point us to is that some of the foundations for becoming a media literate person start much younger. And they can start in ways that are still very developmentally appropriate for young children. It just requires that the adults around kids have some frameworks, some ways of thinking about how to interact with those kids as they're using media, so that children can have some new critical thinking skills forming in their brain about what they're seeing in front of them. So Dorothy, maybe if we go to the next, or Carrie, if we go to the next slide here. Yeah, and actually, Dorothy, did you want to take this one on inquiry, or I can?
Why don't you do this one?
Okay. Yeah. So what Faith gets into in her book is helping to build the early foundations of asking questions and thinking about what you're seeing in front of you. And so this in education circles is often known as kind of inquiry-based education, but it's about recognizing some of those questions that come to your head. And when I'm talking about this with little kids, it means really fostering those questions. Like it's okay to have those questions. It's okay to wonder, why does this page have somebody with a blue face on him? Why did this author decide to put this character here? And sometimes little kids don't even necessarily have those words yet, but the adults around them can model what it looks like to ask those questions. And that can help children recognize that they do have those questions themselves and that they then can ask them too. And that can help them get at the source of all sorts of things that are related to media literacy, such as the motivation of the author or the creator. When you start asking, like, why is that picture on this book, or why is that character in this game, then you're starting to get at some of those really important media literacy skills. And so if we go to the next slide, there are some ways to do this. Yes, go ahead, Dorothy.
Okay, I just wanted to say about this slide, and also to say what you're describing so wonderfully is the value of co-viewing, no matter the kind of media it is, and asking those questions and modeling as an adult for young children, even babies. But in this chapter 6, I just wanted to point out, these are a few questions that a couple of teachers have used as effective practices in their elementary school age group. And just to point out, what does the author know about this topic? Instead of reacting to the concepts of the author, we want students to think about the ideas that are presented in the book or article or what have you. And we want students to be able to read about a topic, think it through, and not just like report what the author is saying. We don't want students to simply summarize the content like a book report. The goal is to have them use their mind to think it through, interact with the ideas of the book. And I also wanted to just mention on this, what can we learn about this topic from the author? And do we think the author responds well to the topic? It's not necessary how the author is presenting it per se, as long as a student can use the book or article as a springboard to think about the ideas themselves. So Lisa, I don't know if you wanted to add something for that.
Yeah, I'll just note that one of the things that it may not even be kind of front in mind for librarians, say when you're doing story time or story hour, is to just even help parents, give models to parents is how they can bring up the concept of authorship, right? Because often that's not the first thing. The first thing is the story, but just little tweaks that help to signal that this is a story I'm telling you, this is a game I'm showing you, this is an app that you might play that was written by somebody. And they had ideas that they wanted to put down on paper or that they wanted to put on a screen. That's kind of the first step to understanding media more deeply.
So we could go to the next slide. And this is just a list of tips that Faith has included in chapter 10 on engaging families. And I'd like to just point out a couple of them. Ask before you tell. So it's very important not to assume that families are looking for advice. And we can use our best reference interview skills to help determine what's going to be helpful for a family. The third one, send home, ask your child about messages. Now that's more geared towards educators, but it can apply to the library profession. It's important that we and parents listen to children when we, ask a question like, what did you learn today? and not make assumptions again, but focus on listening before responding as we help these young library patrons. And I love the fourth one, help parents and guardians make their own wise decisions. And I think that's sort of a theme for today and a perfect fit for libraries. So Lisa, did you have something for this?
Yeah, I think that mostly on this one, it is about that just kind of tuning into families and listening to what they might be grappling with first. And that can be your point of engagement for them. I mean, as we were describing earlier, and Connie was taking us through the new media versus old media moments, it's overwhelming, right? That's a lot of new stuff. It can feel like it is different from just the days of picking out a book. And so helping to kind of hear that angst a little bit at first and hear where parents might be, that can be your entree into then asking maybe some more specific questions about what it is that you're hoping to be able to bring to your children's experience.
Very good. And I think the last slide, just wanted to point out that media literacy is, the adults are as important as helping the children. And kind of going back to that, how do you know question? How do you know something is credible, whether it's a social media post, an online resource, or an email claiming that it's coming from our bank kind of thing. So librarians can help people become more tech savvy, more digital media savvy on many levels. And this was a mobile job center from our Enoch Pratt Library in Baltimore, and then a photo of Carroll County Library doing a program out at Antietam Battlefield. So lots of opportunities. And Lisa, did something finish
and
up?
Exactly. And I was just going to bring that question of how do you know into Story Hour for a minute as well for librarians. So one of the things that Faith does so beautifully in her book about media literacy for young children is she does give very kind of very explicit and specific tips about what you can do when you're looking at something with children, whether it's the sign outside a library or on the street, or whether it's a book that you're reading with kids, or whether it's an app or game you're playing with them. And often, I think those who understand early literacy are taught to ask children questions. We already know how important dialogic reading is, right? To ask children, what do you think is going to happen next? And then they can respond and they can say, oh, I think that the balloons are all going to, fly into the sky, or whatever it is that they might say. But the next question that's often not asked and that could be asked to promote media literacy is to ask, how do you know? So if the children think that, say, I'm just thinking honestly, like an old Curious George book or something where Curious George is about to do something very mischievous. And you might be asking, what do you think Curious George is going to do? And the children might yell out, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. Well, then your next question can be, how do you know that? And they can look into the text and they can point to specific things, or they can say, well, 2 pages back, he was going to do this, or I saw them do this, or we know that his character is that. And that's honestly, that's a very important media literacy skill. That's building the skill of looking for evidence in the text that shows you what is going to happen next, or that helps you understand author's intent for what's going next. Now, those are all kind of big words that with little kids you may not be using, words like author intent or evidence, but you could take a moment where a child might say, I think this is going to happen because look on that page. And you can say, you just found some evidence that that's going to happen. So these are the kinds of really kind of key early and foundational media literacy skills that we can use across all sorts of kinds of media with children and families.
Can I jump in just for a second? This is getting me so excited from my school years. I was a school librarian with middle schoolers and with elementary, and we did inquiry projects all the time. I just loved working with the classroom and teachers, and I watched kindergartners they are the best questioners in the world. The littler they ask, the older they get, they quit being as creative with their questions. They can be. I mean, they can come up, and they're amazing when they come up with their own questions that they want to go research and have answers to. But the little ones, they just are like asking everything in the world, and they can produce the most amazing. They can't always write, but we were doing inquiry projects in kindergarten where the kids were drawing what they had learned, and they were working with animals, but they were so excited about what they were able to show. We always had a big family event where the families came and we did a gallery walk with their work. But it's amazing, as little as they can be, all the way up to middle school, high school, and the kind of research projects that they can happen when it's generated from what they're interested in, and they can generate their own questions. It's amazing what they can produce and the energy that they have. So it just, and we can do that in the public library as well. We can work with them. We can ask what they want to learn. And it was also amazing. I had a project with my middle schoolers where they were working with an illustration, and they found the same illustration in 2 different books. And they came to me and were like, Mrs. Sanders, this is like, it's described in this book this way in this photograph, and it's in another book, and I was like, there is a problem. And like, so then we started doing what Lisa was just talking about. So which one do we think is accurate? Which one's correct? And we ended up writing to the publisher of the one that we were questioning, and it was the most amazing learning experience for them to like really not just take what they see, but to think about what they're looking at and question what they're seeing and to make that discernment. And make those inferences from the text, what was accurate. It was just so many lessons were involved there. And again, it was a book, but it was a photograph, but they were really beginning to do that critical thinking on their own. So there's just so much rich thinking skills and analysis, and you can put all those big words in there in the vocabulary. And sometimes there's a lot of folks that say, teach that vocabulary, let the kids know what they're doing. And then as they go through, our school district was really trying to work with inquiry all the way through the grade levels. We had an inquiry specialist. And so if the kids start using some of those terms when they're younger, it becomes natural vocabulary, and they begin to that's just what they know that they're learning and what they're able to do. So there's just so much there. So that's what I just couldn't keep my mouth shut. I had to like talk a little.
That was great. And I just wanted to mention before we go off the topic, is that this book is set up in a way that you'll find a lot of nuggets, a lot of little treasures. So it's almost like any page you open up, you'll find something great. So I didn't know, Lisa, if there was anything final you had.
Well, that's it. Yeah, I do highly recommend the book. It's not just about digital media, but it absolutely applies to digital media.
I
I
think this is Connie.
Up
We're gonna end with a fun little activity before we break for lunch.
Thanks, Carrie. So we have just another conversation where I want you to put yourself in a negative headspace. We're going to start in a negative headspace. Don't worry, we'll end in a positive headspace before you go off to lunch. This might be a familiar sight for many of you, right? Maybe you are out to dinner with your friends, or maybe you're just out to dinner with, with somebody else, and you see this, whether it's your friends or somebody else at another table. You can see the title of this image is Cell Phone Zombies. That's often what we think when we see it, right? And this is something that we often hear a lot of critique about in our society, right? When we see those heads down, looking at a phone, not interacting with the people around you. This is the worry, I think, that many people have about media use today. So we're going to, like I said, I want you to keep that kind of negative headspace. We're going to look at another picture. And I want you to look at this picture. And I want you to put your first reaction either in the chat or you can say it out loud. And again, I want you to think about this as negatively as possible. Nobody will judge you. You're putting on your most negative hat or somebody else's negative hat. Maybe it's not your hat. You're grabbing it from someone else and putting it on. What is your first reaction? I see digital babysitter. I see zombie. screen addicted, checked out. Our culture doesn't allow us to have children in public without silencing them. Lazy parents. This person might not be learning social skills. They're disconnected. Oh, I like this one. Oh, not my child. That would never be my child. Missing time connecting with family over dinner, disconnection from family, unhealthy, right? No interaction with the world, not interacting at the restaurant table. Oh, okay, something learned from parents, right? We make those assumptions a lot. Out of touch, not in the present, rude, missing an experience. Parents lack morals and values. We do, we make those jumps, right? Okay. I'm seeing the chat slow down. We got all of our negativity out. But these are really common feelings that sometimes we have to admit, sometimes we have ourselves, maybe not about this specific situation, but all of us go out into the world, we see a context like this, and we jump to some conclusions, and we know that our customers do too, right? Just one quick little story. I remember when I used to manage a children's space in a branch, I would get complaints sometimes about the presence of iPads in the library. And one woman complained and said that the library should be a sanctuary and children should not have access to technology because they should be coming in and only looking at these books. It's a sanctuary from the outside world, right? So we see this, whether it's from our own minds sometimes, the minds of our customers, or the people around us. We hear these judgments, we see these judgments. Okay, now I want you to take that negative hat off, and I want you to recontextualize this situation. I want you to think about those 3 C's, right? I want you to think about content. I want you to think about context, and I want you to think about child. We're still making a lot of assumptions here. None of us know this boy. All we know is that he likes Kylo Ren, which for some people might be a negative, for others might be a positive. I don't know. Certainly dates him. We know he's, you know, a more modern Star Wars child. So we don't know this child, so we're still making assumptions, right? But I want you to think about the content, the context, and the child. And now that you're thinking about those 3 things, what could be going on here? Paint that picture, tell that story. What could be happening in this? Okay, I see environmental overstimulation. The restaurant's too loud for him. Fully engaged, right? This child might be fully engaged in what they're doing, right? Sensory, right? Yeah, sensory coping. He's coping with sensory issues. Might have a sensory overload, needs to recenter in his own world. I like this one. Thank goodness they brought headphones, so considerate, right? I just took a couple flights recently, and yeah, like you want kids to have headphones. I mean, I have my own kids. I don't need to listen to what those other kids are watching. I love kids dearly, but yeah, please wear the headphones. Autistic, avoiding overstimulation. Absolutely. The child could be using a learning app while muting the sensory overload around him. Absolutely. Could be doing homework, right? We just talked a lot about the fact that a lot of these kids these days, that's how they do homework. I just mentioned I was in an airport recently, and we were in another state where we were in Chicago, actually. We were walking past, well, that's not a state. I know that's not a state. It was the city in Illinois, right? We were in Chicago, and we walked past a boy on a Chromebook, and my daughter was like, oh, look, that kid's doing homework, right? We have there's a different visual context now for what homework looks like. Maybe he's mixing his own music. Oh my gosh, of course, right? Coming from Don the musician. We heard earlier Don's a musician. I like Aaron's. Perhaps they're using the free Wi-Fi for homework at dinner, right? We don't know all of the situations happening. Could be reading a great book, could be connecting with another family member who can't be in person, right? Maybe they have a tradition of always having dinner with that family member who couldn't be there, and they're eating dinner right now, and he wanted to connect with that family member. Reading a new book, maybe the parents are busy, and you know what? That's okay, right? Sometimes we get our negative judgment hats on, or other, you know, staff or their customers do, and we say, oh, they're using that to be a babysitter. But you know what? Sometimes that's okay, right? Sometimes it's okay for the child to be occupied while the parent does something that they need to do. Could be doing homework at a Chick-fil-A because there's free Wi-Fi, needs to use this to communicate. Maybe he's researching how to make better iced tea. You know what? I think so. I think this kid's like a two screen experiencer. You watch a movie, you look stuff up at the same time. Maybe he goes to dinner and he drinks the iced tea and says, I could make this better. I'm going to research that. I like that. Parents are expanding the amount of time they can stay where they want to be. Yeah, for sure. Especially when, when you're a parent and you're used to maybe being able to go out to dinner for 2 hours, and now you have my oldest one, when he was 2, we would go to a restaurant with family and you'd put him in his seat, and 5 minutes later he would start squirming and he'd yell, walk around, because he needed to walk around. And sometimes for my own sanity, I needed to give him a video to watch, right? So that I could have more than 5 minutes at that table. So, okay. We saw a ton of stuff in this chat. We had put our negative hats on, and those are the easy hats, right? Those negative hats are the easy ones. We don't have to even think about it. We know what those thoughts are. But when we remove that bias, whether it's our own bias or the bias of the culture and context around us, we can look at those 3 C's, right? We can look at the content, we can look at the context, and we can look at the individual child, and we can say, it makes sense that there might be a child at a restaurant with headphones on using a device, because we don't know why they're using it. Now, when we're talking to families at a library, maybe we're the ones that guided that family to this answer, because maybe the family said, hey, we need a really good, we need something really good to help my child with math, right? Maybe our first instinct is to guide them to a book, but then when we ask more and we say, well, where are you going to be? Where are you going? How does the child learn best usually? And maybe we hear that the child has extrasensory needs. Maybe we hear that the family is going on a trip. And maybe we hear that the child has traditionally done better on a device when they're learning. Now, instead of guiding them to a book, we guide them to an app. And this is the picture that we form from that conversation when we've looked at those 3 C's. So that's our little thought experiment before lunch. Is lunch next? Oh, no, it's not.
I'm going to do a real sneak peek of what's coming in the afternoon. So thank you, Connie. I just think and I'll just say, Connie and I do a lot of trainings in Maryland together. We weave this image in. We've used this in other media mentorship trainings, and it's always fascinating, the responses we get on both ends, the negative and the positive, but it's just always a really eye-opening experiment in a way, or just activity for us to just like really look at truly the context of what could be happening, and be able to think about all the different possibilities and supporting families and children in the different ways they need and use technology. So here's this amazing book, Becoming a Media Mentor. And this is, we're going to talk about this afternoon as part of the toolkit, which we're going to pass on to you, that came out of the Maryland Harford County grant project a few years ago. This has been used as a book study in Maryland. It's been used as the basis of a book study in Illinois. And there are really 3 ways that are discussed in this book, ways to become a media mentor. And we just wanted to start planting these seeds because we're moving into the afternoon session, which is really taking all these concepts of media mentorship and putting them into practice. That is the theme of the afternoon, is what does this look like when we go back to our libraries, we work with our children, we work with our families, how does this manifest in our practice and in our work? So just to keep in mind, there are 3 ways. So we've done a lot of 3s. We've had our 3 C's, we've had our 3 M's. Now we just have basic 3 ways to be a media mentor, and they are discussed here in this book. We want you to think about them as kind of the foundation of what you're going to hear this afternoon. The first one is, and I think I need to advance the slides here. is advisory. And this should be maybe, all of these we're so familiar with, but just kind of a different way to think about them, moving from traditional media to new. We do this all the time, and it goes back to the 3 C's. When we do readers advisory, we are always thinking about the child, the individual needs of the child, the content that they're going to be reading or looking at, and then the context in which they're going to be using it. So that's one big way to be a media mentor, is just through advisory work. Second is through programming, which we've talked a little bit about this morning, but we're going to look at that in depth this afternoon. All the different ways we can develop programs and how we can integrate media into our programming, whether it's a story time, whether it's a STEM program, whether it's a book study, whatever a teen program, whatever it might be, something that we can just begin to think about the different ways to enfold technology into the programming that we offer for children or for families. And then the third way to be a media mentor is through curation. This is natural for us to do. We do this with all of our collections, and we think about this as we make any kind of purchase for the collections in our libraries and in our different areas of resources, is just to, and then we can begin to help families begin to do that for themselves. So that's the third way. And we are just really excited to have this come this afternoon. And we want you to kind of keep those in mind as you hear from our guests. We have several special guests that are coming from all over the United States, really. We have Alaska, we have Connecticut, we have Brooklyn Public Library, New York, we have and then we have some great examples of how to work with partners in our communities, and just to kind of keep these 3 things in mind, and how we can really put into practice the concepts that we've been hearing this morning with media mentorship. And so I think at this point, we are going to let you all have a nice break.